Democrats already lining up against President Trump's tax cut plan, but they might want to take some advice from an icon of the left who argued it's never about red or blue, but all about your green. Hi, everybody. I'm Dagen McDowell in for Neil Cavuto. This is a special edition of Your World. And we're not only celebrating Memorial Day today. Today marks the 100th anniversary of JFK's birth. And nearly 54 years ago, President Kennedy was pushing across-the-board tax cuts to boost the economy, making the case in an interview with NBC. Take a listen.
I'm in favor of a tax cut because I'm concerned that if we don't get the tax cut, that we're going to have an increase in unemployment and that we may move into a period of economic downturn. We had a recession in '58, recession in 1960. We've done pretty well since then, but we still have over 4 million unemployed. And I think this tax cut can give the stimulus to our economy over the next 2 or 3 years. I think it will provide for greater national wealth. I think it will reduce unemployment. I think it will strengthen our gold position. So I think that the proposal we've made is responsible and in the best interest of the country.
Just over 2 months later, JFK was gone. But his tax cuts passed through Congress in 1964, sparking a boom. A lesson for the left and right now. To Larry Sabato, author of The Kennedy Half Century and director of the University of Virginia's Center for Politics. Larry, it's always terrific to see you. Is it possible that politicians and lawmakers today can learn a lesson from JFK then?
Absolutely they can. That was a bold proposal for its time, and it had lots of opposition in both parties. They were more concerned about the size of the deficit, and they believed that a tax cut would generate a high inflation. Well, it didn't happen. That was a golden moment for the American economy, and America was in a very special, very dominant position in the world. But it's important to look at these proposals in the context of their times and to look at their specifics. And JFK did that, and I've got to note something that's really important. He started in 1962 pushing this proposal, pushing it. Right before he was killed in Dallas, he got the House of Representatives to approve it. It was on the Senate schedule. Of course, it was up to Lyndon Johnson to do it. And what's amusing is Lyndon Johnson pushed it first. It got passed in February 1964 because Johnson also believed Kennedy was right, and he wanted to give enough time for the maximum economic effect to take hold, boosting his election prospects. That's exactly what happened.
Well, Larry, what can our lawmakers today learn from back then? Clearly, one thing is JFK was terrific at messaging and communicating, not just to his base, but to the American people.
Yes, and one thing I noticed, and I've been over all his public statements and particularly his comments on TV and during his press conferences, he kept the message simple. He knew the facts, he knew the details, he would occasionally throw in a number, but he didn't drown in numbers, which sometimes congressmen and even presidents do when they're presenting tax proposals of one sort or another. You have to remember the audience. They can only follow so much at once, and they're not familiar, most of them, with the details of the tax code.
Back then, though, the tax code was even more so than now with our more than 70,000 pages. In terms of the tax rates, people were crying out for tax relief. The top rate, although very few people paid it, if any, was above 90% back then. That's a very different situation than it is today.
Yes, the rates are lower, but they were high back then, even on those making very little. People with an income of $4,000 a year were still paying 20% in federal taxes. Think about that. And of course, we know $4,000 is worth a lot more today, but still, that was a pretty high tax rate. I don't think it's the rate so much as it is the encouragement of a president and a Congress to those running the economy and those benefiting from the economy, top and bottom, to think about how they could use the money to benefit not just themselves, but the country as a whole. This should be, this new tax cut, whatever its form, it should be primarily for the middle class. JFK's was. It was for the middle class, and it was the middle class engine that got America revved up in the 60s, and until Lyndon Johnson ruined it with guns and butter during the Vietnam era, it really was a golden economy.
Larry, it's great to see you. Thank you so much. Have a great Memorial Day.
Thank you so much. Have a wonderful Memorial Day.
Larry Sabato from the University of Virginia. So with Washington all jacked up for a summer brawl over tax cuts, is the lesson from JFK much like the lesson from Ronald Reagan? If you give the people more of their own money, the economy will grow more. Let's ask Gianno Caldwell and Danielle McLaughlin. Gianno, what do you say?
I say yes. I think that it's too bad that Democrats have rejected the knowledge of JFK at this particular time. But I think, like Forbes said, that trends are showing that this is going to be a growth year, 2017, considering the fact that we will get tax reform done within the first 2 years of the Trump administration. And businesses, for the first time in 8 years, have certainty of what's going to happen in the business climate. I think that people are more comfortable in spending their dollars under a Trump administration.
Well, Danielle, I know one thing, that higher taxes during the last 8 years of President Obama, more spending, a doubling of the government, our national debt, it didn't even get us growth of 3% in any year. I know that.
No, you're absolutely right, Dagan. We are been middling at about 1.5% to 2% to 2.5% over the last 8 years. We haven't seen 3% in more than a decade. And of course, Trump's budget depends on the notion that we will get 3% growth. I agree with Gianno that tax cuts are important and that consumer confidence and business confidence is very, very important also. The question is, who gets those tax cuts? Middle class, clearly important. Small businesses, clearly important. Big corporations in this country, you know, they pay about 15% once all the deductions are taken care of, but it's the small businesses who are getting crushed by taxes.
So, Danielle, it seems like Gianno is agreeing with the Trump idea that you give small businesses that are pay their taxes based on their own individual returns, you let them pay the same rate that the big guys pay, which is exactly what the Trump administration wants to do. That we're talking about 26 million small businesses in this country that create 2/3 of the new jobs. You level the playing field. How is that? How do Democrats fight against that?
Well, I mean, I can speak to that a little bit. I think that Democrats have concerns about the highest tax rates coming down and increased inequality. I'm not sure that these tax cuts address the middle class appropriately, because the engine of this country is the middle class, of course.
But, Gianno, talk about the leveling the playing field and bringing down those corporate rates to make all of our businesses, big and small, more competitive.
Well, when we talk about lowering it, that no matter if you're a freelancer, if you're a Fortune 500 company, if you're a mom and pop, you're paying the same tax rate. I think that is an excellent idea, and what we should do, especially considering the fact that the president's budget is usually more of a framework for Congress to push out. I think this is what we need to be doing, and this is the business of what we should be doing. And now that we finally have a united party in the House, the White House, Congress, all over, we can finally do something about it. And to speak to some of the Democratic hysteria over the tax plan, where we saw some issues where, well, not even issues, what people are saying, Democrats in the media are saying is issues, the $72 billion cut to Social Security, when in fact me as a person who worked for the Social Security Administration for over a decade in the SSI program, I can tell you there's a lot of waste, fraud, and abuse, and even the Inspector General had said this year that it was $1 billion sent to folks who shouldn't have received it, in terms of they didn't have SSN numbers, they have Social Security numbers. So there's a number of different things I think that this budget does very, very well, and it's going to cut, obviously, taxes for the middle class. I think that's very important here.
Danielle, I'm going to give you the final word, but what has always concerned me about the tax code is that the people who get the short end of the stick are lower income Americans or middle income to income households, because of how complicated it is. And if you're trying to reform taxes and just double the standard deduction, which would make it easier to prepare your taxes, I don't understand how everybody in politics can't get on board with at least some elements of that.
I think simplification is important. As you say, the tax code is 70,000 pages long. But I think we have to think about tax as well as a tool of sort of social construct. product. We have the mortgage interest deduction because we want people to buy houses. So there are reasons for complexity within that tax code itself.
Well, you know what? There are no golden geese, I hope, in terms of tax reform, because you used to be able to deduct the interest on your credit card debt. You know who got rid of that? Ronald Reagan.
The good old days.
Yeah. How crazy is that, right? It was great to see you both, Danielle and Gianno. Thank you so much for being here. The TSA testing new security measures this holiday weekend at nearly a dozen U.S. airports. To Fox Business Network's Jeff Flock at Chicago's O'Hare International on what you can expect. Hey, Jeff.
Dagan, happy Memorial Day to you. I'll tell you, it may be a happy Memorial Day, but at certain airports around the country, maybe not so much so, because the TSA is trotting out and testing new security procedures. It's going to make it a little more difficult to get through the lines. Take a look at the airports where you made the Memorial Day holiday and into the summer. Some big airports, some medium-sized airports, Detroit, Boston, LAX, even small ones like Boise and Fort Lauderdale. New procedures that will require you to take a whole lot of things out of your carry-on bags that you didn't have to before. You're used to taking your laptop out. Well, get ready to take a lot more out. Like, look at this. Chocolate will have to now become something that you take out of your bag. That's because they found that chocolate looks an awful lot like plastic explosive when it goes through the security machine. Books also will have to come out because they're thick, and when someone has a book in there, they can't see what's under it. So then they have to go and, open the bag and all that sort of thing. So they want to put your book in a bin. iPads and tablets, anything essentially larger that's electronic, that's larger than a cell phone, will have to come out. As well as all food, any kind of food whatsoever gives the screeners a problem, and so that will have to go in a bin. A lot of those bins out there, people are not big fans of them, but there you go. Here's the only good news that I have to report, Dagan, and that is this won't roll out nationwide. TSA says until they're sure that they can do it without a lot of delay. In addition, if you're a TSA pre-check, it won't apply to you. You'll be able to just walk right through, leave your bag full. Maybe a little more incentive to get one of those pre-check designations.
Oh, good. So I don't need to worry about carrying that hoagie and a couple of pomegranates with me when I fly. Thank you, Jeff.
Well, yeah, you can bring them with you, but you're going to have to stick them in a bin.
I'm pre-check, baby. I am pre-check. I'm no dummy. Thank you, Jeff. It was good to see you. Jeff Flock for us at O'Hare International Airport. Now to the other threat, terrorists targeting young people at an Ariana Grande concert in England, raising new concerns as the summer concert season kicks in over here. And it's not just concerts. We're talking theme parks, sporting events. They could be vulnerable as well. So how can parents keep their kids safe? To former FBI investigator Bill Daley. Bill, ever since 9/11 even, we've talked about soft targets being in the crosshairs of terrorists. We saw it with the Pulse nightclub. You see it again. What's being done here in the United States to beef up security, if they can do anything?
Well, certainly security is looking more about patterns of behavior. They're trying to find out if they have people doing reconnaissance coming in and out of locations, and through facial recognition, security and law enforcement are trying to pattern people's behaviors to see if they have repeat behaviors that indicate they have a problem. However, ultimately, Dagan, it's really up to ourselves to take care of ourselves and our families. And we saw during the tragedy over Manchester is that people are scrambling to try to find their children and connect with them. So, from my view, is that security is a personal responsibility when you get out into the spectrum, whether it's theme parks, whether it's major sporting events, whether it's in a public area where a lot of people are gathering to see a tourist destination.
But if somebody is carrying a bomb in a backpack or an explosive device, or it's on their person, individuals are not generally prepared to identify that. I mean, somebody's setting a package down and walking away, but nobody can look at an individual. They're worried about picking up their kids and tell that they might be a terrorist.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm not suggesting that people should be those eyes and ears. That's for law enforcement. That's for intelligence. That's for the local venue security personnel. What I'm suggesting is that individuals need to take care of themselves and their family. And there are a couple of things that people can do. When you're out in public areas, make sure you move very quickly through any non-secure locations, whether it's at an airport, the departure area before you go through security screening.
So don't linger.
Exactly. When you go through picking up your luggage, get out of there quickly. If you're at an entry or exit point, as we just saw up in Manchester, but other places, to a venue, whether it's to an amusement park or to a sporting event, move out of there quickly, but also keep an eye out for ways to get out of the area. If something does happen, you want to be able to know where the nearest exit is, what's
Emergency
the pathway.
exits, right.
Exactly. What's the path of least resistance for you to get out of that emergency situation? And the other point, which is very important, is where your family should gather. So if they get separated, just maybe through the normal course of going off and getting a bit lost, but also in the event of emergency where you can't use cell phones, you can't communicate, where are you going to gather? You're going to go back to the family car? Is there a place at a hotel? Is there a corner you're going to meet at? It needs to be someplace away from that venue you're at, because if that's the epicenter of the incident, it's going to be chaotic. So we would do say, we will all meet here. In case something happens, we get separated, we will meet here and we'll wait for you. We won't move from this location until we all gather.
In terms of increased security screening at, say, venues throughout just the United States, as an example, one of the problems is when you start doing that, you create, again, choke points where people are crowded. You come up with crowds, and you make those people somehow even more vulnerable to terror attacks.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the challenges here. People often say, well, then just move the security checkpoint out further. Well, I mean, how far do you move it out to? You move it out to the curbside.
We talked about that after the bombing in Brussels at the airport, about you start screening cars out, well, then you're creating another choke point.
A choke point and a vulnerability. So I think at some point we're going to be looking at other means, technology means, be able to better screen people. But right now, I think security and law enforcement and local security forces take care of the venue. You, when you go there with your family, yes, be aware of your surroundings, but make sure you're preparing to take care of yourself and your family. That's number one.
Bill, great to see you. Thank you so much. Have a great Memorial Day, Bill Daley. So far, markets shrugging off the terror fears. Why someone here fears that. And flipping the leader of the free world, the bird. Democrats promising a summer full of this. And is this the right message to be sending to the future of America? Despite new terror fears and a seemingly constant buzz of controversy surrounding the White House, investors are buying stocks, hoping the GOP can pass the president's economic agenda. Let's get reaction from Scott Martin, Jessica Tarlov, and Larry Glazer. I begin with you, Larry. Stocks at record highs. What's going on?
Look, both Memorial Day and the stock market rally have something in common, and that's the P's. Memorial Day is about honoring the nation's protectors. It's about picnics, and it's about parades with family. And the stock market rally is about profits, and it's about pro-growth policies with an eye of optimism towards the future. So the risks that we have today are not so much from horrible geopolitical events, terrible terrorist events. It's really from partisan politics derailing policy that leads to profits. And I think that's the real concern here, is this is really what affects the stock market. At the end of the day, it's profits, and those policies are directly tied to profits.
Well, so if the stock market tanks, Jessica, then you guys are to blame.
Oh, no, please don't blame us, unless you're going back and you're going to blame George Bush for something, which would be a Memorial Day miracle. No, I take Larry's point there, and there has been renewed optimism in the economy, in the market, since Donald Trump took office. Obviously, President Obama's got us pretty far, but no one can take that away from Donald Trump. I would say, though, that this is not all about the pro-growth policies. The conversations that we are having today are about the trade-offs within the president's budget, like, for instance, $1.6 billion for a border wall, $800 billion of cuts to Medicaid spending. That's going to hit directly his constituents. So I can expect to see the market, and I know the rest of you are better market watchers than I, but I expect some more volatility as this continues, and I don't believe the House will be able to pass it. Many are saying dead on arrival, and in the Senate as well.
If we don't get tax reform, Scott, and a health care overhaul, an Obamacare overhaul, does that make you nervous as an investor, given the kind of elevated valuations that you see in stocks?
Yeah, it does, Dagan. I mean, I'm going to add another P to Larry's fabulous list, which is promise. We've had these promises, and we had tax cut promises, repatriation promises. We've had affordable health care repatriation or reproduction there. I think that's really the issue here, is that you have a lot of these promises, a lot of these hopes from the administration that have so far fallen on deaf ears. And so what's going to happen in the next few months as the market starts to realize that maybe these things aren't going to come back into play, and then what happens to stock prices after that? They probably go down.
But even after
Scott, I would just add to to that, though, that pro-growth policies are more than just about promises. It's about a mindset of pro-growth. It's about a mindset of entrepreneurialism. It's about a mindset of fostering capital, getting companies to commit capital where they've been unwilling to do so. And it's also about promoting prosperity, another P, for the middle class. Again, something that's really been lacking over the last several administrations. I think that's really the key.
But Larry, prognostications out of companies, though, another P, is also based on the fact that we're going to see a better business environment. If we don't see that, I feel like companies are going to be upset because they got misled.
And as Jonas Ferris said on Bulls and Bears of last weekend, that maybe Trump's brought back the era of conspicuous consumption. And so that, like, the spirit in business and among individuals can carry this economy along despite what doesn't happen in D.C. But, Jessica, I want to point to the terror attack in Manchester, and the lack of a reaction in the markets. Is it just that we're sadly accustomed to this and expect this?
It's quite unfortunate that this could be the new normal. And then even seeing that the UK went to the critical level, the highest that they are, basically saying that a terror attack was imminent going forward, and obviously concerns at home about what could go on our own soil. So yes, could this just be the new normal? Unfortunately, I think that that's possible. I'm interested to see what happens over the next few weeks if there is, for instance, a follow-up attack. But it looks like we are just adjusting.
And Scott, if you look at where the yield on the 10-year Treasury is and how low it is, you know, a sign that people have been piling into Treasuries for the last how many years, that at least indicates that people have some safety in their portfolio, that they have the safety of bonds to protect them in the event of something that does damage the economy.
Yeah, the 10-year yield, Dagan, is a little bit of a head-scratcher here because economic growth, while weak, the job market here in the U.S. is very strong. Unemployment at record lows and certainly hundreds of thousands of jobs being created every month would lend itself to think that the 10-year note should be a little higher. So is that bond market money, which is usually the smartest money on the street, forecasting lower than expected economic growth and therefore some of these policies not coming through?
Larry, final word to you.
Sure. I would also add that we also see that in oil prices. Lower oil prices can be perceived a lot of different ways, but certainly lower gas prices for the average family ahead of the big summer driving season is a good thing, at least in the short run, for the economy, because the consumer is 2/3 of the U.S. economy, and they'll spend a little bit more money this summer because it's less money they're spending at the pump.
And Larry, that low gas prices just got a double thumbs up from me, if in case you can't see.
And a P word, pump.
Yeah, exactly.
So
pump.
I finally say something with a P.
Jessica, thank you so much, Scott and Larry, for being here on Memorial Day. Everyone on Capitol Hill wants to talk with fired FBI Director James Comey, but should they be going after the leakers? And Republicans are facing a summer of resistance funded by the Democratic National Committee strictly to oppose the Trump administration. Will that strategy work?
Live from America's News headquarters, I'm Eric Shawn. President Trump paying tribute to America's fallen troops on his first Memorial Day as Commander-in-Chief. During a ceremony at Arlington National Cemetery in Virginia, the president said, "We only hope that every day we can prove worthy of their sacrifices." He also visited a section of the cemetery where U.S. military members killed in Iraq and Afghanistan are buried, including the son of Homeland Security Secretary John Kelly. Lieutenant Robert Kelly died in Afghanistan in 2010. Police arresting Tiger Woods on a DUI charge happened in Jupiter, Florida, north of Miami. TMZ reporting an officer smelled alcohol and Woods refused to take a breathalyzer test. The golf champ has not played for months. He's been out for the rest of the season recovering from back surgery. I'm Eric Shawn. Now back to your world and Dagan and a special tribute on this Memorial Day.
As temperatures rise, tempers are flaring, and Republicans are starting to face the summer of resistance from Democrats. Notre Dame grads walking out during Vice President Mike Pence's commencement address. Students booing Secretary of Education Betsy DeVos. Heated town halls with Republican congressmen and anti-Trump protests at universities. Will these actions actually backfire for Democrats? To Red Alert Politics, Angela Morabito and former Director of Strategic Communications for Hillary Clinton, Adrian Elrod. Adrian, to you first. Clearly, the Democrats don't think that there's any downside to this.
No, look, first of all, what's happening out here is that people are very frustrated with the president. A lot of people who actually voted for Donald Trump are incredibly frustrated with the fact that he's not focusing on their issues that matter to them, and they're resisting. I just spent a couple days in Arkansas, where I'm from, and I will tell you, there are a lot of Republicans out there who are now joining this resistance movement. They're showing up at town halls. They're showing up at rallies. They are asking their members of Congress why Donald Trump is not supporting an agenda that actually works for them.
But Angela, what will work is actually getting people elected in the midterm elections, or even getting people elected at the local level. How does just resistance, and you see violence in some instances, but just saying no and using incredibly incendiary language, how does that really help the left agenda?
Well, I'm not sure that it helps the left at all. In fact, it might be backfiring on them completely. When the left protests, they show up, they shout people down, they walk out when Mike Pence speaks at graduation, and that just kills me, because at the moment you're celebrating what you've learned in college, you show that you have not learned to sit through a speech from someone you disagree with. All those kids who walked out, they just devalued their own educations, their own degrees that they've worked so hard for. And this is not to say that the right does not protest. We absolutely do. We just don't take to the streets. We just don't show up and yell at people. What we do is we use tools like social media, things like standunited.org, to find like-minded people who you won't find shouting someone down at a town hall because they disagree.
But you look at an instance like Betsy DeVos. She was invited to speak at this university, and then Adrienne being booed. I don't know what that accomplishes.
Well, look, I will be one to say that I believe in protesting. I believe in the right to freedom of speech, but I also do support being respectful, when somebody is giving a commencement address, being respectful of the guests. But again, if we're going to talk about rallies, dangerous things that are happening at rallies, let's look at a Donald Trump rally. I mean, people are frustrated. People are incredibly worried about the state of our country, and they're frustrated that the president is not focusing on legislation that is actually helping them.
Well, you actually have the DNC and left and liberal organizations sending people to these town halls, Angela, to create scenes and disrupt them when these congressmen are trying to actually communicate with their constituents.
We're really seeing a huge level of hypocrisy from the Democrats and from the left, because for the past 8 years, what have we heard ad nauseum? It's the GOP must compromise. They're being obstructionist. They must meet us in the middle. Well, now the tables have turned. Now the tables have turned. And are the Democrats willing to compromise? No, the Democrats are trying to obstruct, and they're proud of it. They're proud of this resistance. They have no desire to move things forward under President Trump. So if the GOP wants to fill that space and become the party that moves the government along and creates progress, I think that can only help them. It's up to them to seize that moment.
Adrienne, does obstruction and just saying no win you elections?
Look, here's what I will say. I will remind everybody here that Donald Trump, the House and the Senate are all controlled by Republicans, the White House, the House, and the Senate. This is completely the Republican agenda. Democrats are simply uniting their base, trying to energize their base as much as possible. But if Donald Trump wants to actually get something done, he's got a Republican Senate and a House to work with. And so far, he has not achieved really anything.
We will see. We will see. Adrienne, great to see you. Thank you so much, Angela.
Thank you
as well. Happy Memorial Day. As Congress focuses on the Russia investigation and the firing of former FBI Director James Comey, leaks continue to flow from intelligence agencies. Is that what Congress should be investigating?
I understand politics, but this cuts to the core of intelligence communities running rogue here, and who knows who else.
When you question the motivation, why are they leaking this very sensitive information? And then, quite frankly, I think this is something that the special counsel should be looking at in terms of leaks, as they may have related to the Russian probe.